akademskih minut, ampak smo samo nekaj potrošili. Hvala vsem, ki ste prišli na ta današnji pogovor s profesorico Drude Dahlerup, ki bo seveda potekal v angleškem jeziku. Najprej jo bom na kratko predstavila, njo in seveda njeno delo. Potem mi bom zastavila nekaj vprašanj v zvezi z raziskovalnim področjem, kjer je pravzaprav najbolj intenzivno se ukvarjala in tudi najbolj na široko po svetovnem merilu, in to so spolne kvote v politiki. Potem bom pa dala možnost, da tudi vi povprašate kaj našo gostjo. Pravzaprav je profesorica Drude Dahlerup prišla v Slovenijo v najboljšem možnem trenutku, glede na dano situacijo.
In the best possible moment.
You already talked about the moment that you came to explain the Slovenian audience.
Sorry, I was just curious.
I just wanted to explain, Drude, how we met. First, my first knowledge on your work dates into the beginning of 90s, when I got the book Unfinished Democracy, the book that was edited by Elina Javier Manila and Torek, and in which you contributed one chapter and a summary. And I have to say that this book paved my way to the field of women in politics, to my own empirical research in Slovenia, and I'm still grateful for that book and for your contribution. I would like to start to talk to you about your field of research, which was, in my opinion, more intensive and the largest one, but I might be wrong, you will say if I am. This is the field of researching gender and politics, and more precisely, gender quotas in politics. But what is interesting to me is how come that you started to work on quotas while in Sweden political parties did not have quotas, what we understand as quotas. So you started also researching quotas worldwide. So first, why quotas?
That's a very good question. But let me start by saying that I'm very happy to be here. And in fact, this is my first time in Ljubljana. I realize. I thought I'd been here before, but I have not. And I'm very happy to meet old friends, Sonia, and of course Milica. Did you tell them that we made this together?
No, I wanted to introduce you, but I was so confused with
right.
So let me please correct my mistake. So, Professor Drude Dahlerup works at the Department of Political Science, University of Stockholm, and she is Danish and Swedish citizen. She has been teaching and researching at the Department of Political Science at the University of Aarhus, first in Denmark. Then she was visiting scholar at Radcliffe College and some other colleges, but at the end she was teaching at the Department of Political Science at Stockholm University. She was also visiting professor at the Birkbeck College, University of London, at Faculty of Social Sciences, Radboud University, Nijmegen, something like that, and honorary professor at Roskilde University.
She's getting better.
But also, and I wanted to really point out this, that Drude is a kind of really the one that we call the sociology public intellectual. She was and she is a member of different boards, different advisory groups. Among others, she was a member of the Global Civil Society Advisory Group to UN Women's Executive Director, first Michelle Bachelet. She is also an expert to, I know, politics organizations, International Knowledge Network for Women in Politics. She is on the editorial advisory board of the journal Equal Opportunities International, member of the board Kvinfo, the Danish Center for Information on Women and Gender in Copenhagen. She is also active in various NGOs on women's affairs. She has published extensively on electoral gender quotas, as I already mentioned. I don't want to mention common work, she will do that. I also wanted to tell that on gender quota she really published a lot on her own and with many other colleagues in different groupings, different books on different countries, so this is really very extensive. But the two books I want to stress more precisely. The one is Women Quotas in Politics, which was edited by her, and me and Sonia contributed the chapter. And also the quotas as fast track to equal political representation of women. I will tell a little more about the last book and invite you for tomorrow's lecture. But now I would like to put the word on your side, and you wanted to say something before starting to talk to quotas.
Well, I just repeat that I'm very happy to be here, and I hope it's okay to speak in English. My Slovenian is 0.
Or Danish too.
Or Swedish.
Or Swedish, yeah.
Yes, now I travel around a lot around the world because apart from being a researcher and teaching and writing books, I'm also an international advisor for UN, from the Interparliamentary Union, various international organizations, and advisor to different countries who invite us because they want to get some advice on how to get more women in politics, how to empower women in politics, and especially how to make some kind of quota system which also fits the electoral system. And this is especially post-conflict countries who are giving this, who want this kind of advice, because now if you have a conflict, you try to start from scratch, and then you see how can we involve the whole population in this. And this is very, very interesting work. It's very concentrated, usually 1 week. I've been an international consultant like that to Egypt, to Tunisia, to Kenya, to Cambodia, to Bhutan, Côte d'Ivoire, and other countries. And usually it's just 1 week, so of course you prepare yourself. Then you come on Monday, and then you meet all kinds of stakeholders. And of course I insist that I want to meet the women's organizations and also the women parliamentarians. Then usually there's a conference in the middle, and then you're supposed to come up with a proposal on Friday. Right? And if it's a Muslim country, it's already on Thursday. And then you write a report when you come home again. So it's very concentrated, but what I really like is when the situation is like this, that they're just trying to make a new electoral law, and you come into the machine room where people who really know about electoral laws are. When you have passed the first row of people who say, oh, you know, it's very beautiful, and women are so beautiful, and I love women, and women were very famous in the past. So don't do anything, don't demand anything today, right? And then when you come into the machine room with people who really know about electoral laws and sitting, and I can say, well, I think that if that's what you want, you should take the Jordan system, or you should take the system in Tunisia, etc. So, and that is very, very, you're really tired afterwards, but it's very important work. It's very important to be there. And I think you can do something, because I know for this is the most important work.
So why quota? Why did you start it?
Well, I thought I was going to work with quotas for kind of 3 years, right? And, but I've had some breaks. So let's start with what you talked about. Why did I work on quotas in the start? Even if there were no quotas in Sweden and in other countries, but what was happening was that there was this kind of party quotas coming on, that the left party is starting to do something and make some kind of protest. Very, very little, because there were lots of resistance, really strong resistance, also on the left, where they said, well, if you have quotas for women, the working class representation will increase. We can come back to that, because I think it's a wrong argument. Then the Green parties came, and the Green parties all over the world have started with this 50-50, and you can have a man and you have to have a man and a woman as the leader of the Green Party. And it was very interesting because women have been fighting in the old parties for such a long time to change. And here comes a new party, the Green Party, and say, okay, because there were so many women coming up with the women's movement and the women's peace movement. And therefore you say from the start it's 50-50, and that was possible. So what I did at that time in the 1980s was to compare. I wrote a book which was called We Have Waited Too Long, where I took all the experience in the 5 Nordic countries, that is Scandinavia, Sweden, Denmark and Norway, and then Finland and Iceland, and wrote down what kind of strategies are being used, right, and put it in a book which was translated into all 5 Nordic countries. And I think that was very helpful for people. Then I left the area, and there were a lot of things about the women's movement. I was active myself in the new women's liberation movement from the 1970s, and I wrote a big book about the women's liberation movement. And then quota came back again. Right?
But Nordic countries are different. In some Nordic parties, in some countries, they do have party quotas. So how this party project was spread among these different countries in the Nordic area? Well, there were different parties, different attitudes, but also some commonalities.
I think the Social Democrats were very important here. Just like the Social Democrat, the Socialist Women's International, I think you were part of that too, was very important in the whole European scene, because it's kind of, original people say, no, we don't want quota, now we're all free, right? Why do we need that, right? And then here comes the election and women get 10% and people say, what? We're not free, you know? But I think when you learn from what they do in the other countries and also from other parties, or even within the Social Democratic Party, the Swedish one and the Norwegian one being the first, it started at the local level. So in one local area, they will start making the zipper system. You know what a zipper system is? That you know a zipper, right? Yeah. And then when you make a nomination, you have 2 lists, one of men and one of women, and then you combine them like this. And the only thing you have to decide is whether you start with, say this is the women and this is the men, whether you start with the women, men with the men, or you start with the men with the men. Which of course is important, especially in small parties, if you only get 1 seat. It's very important who's number 1. So this was really something that spread among the Nordic countries, and very soon Nordic countries became number 1 in the world in terms of women's representation, and got very famous for that. I mean, we passed the 30% already in the end of the 80s, start of the 90s. We went to over 30%, all the Nordic countries, and together with the Netherlands. And when I started traveling and discussing this in Latin America, who's not now really a big quota region, they said we wanted a law on gender quotas, because see, in Scandinavia they have this high women's representation and a gender law. And I said, we don't have a law. It's only some political parties, and usually the left and the center, whereas the liberal parties they don't like, and the conservative they say they don't like to have it. But of course they begin also to have more and more women, right? So some of the researchers in Latin America, and especially in Argentina, which was the first starting in 91, they said, could you just shut up about not having a law? Because we use you as a good example, you need to have a law, right? And I do think that in many countries you need to have a law. And you can also put like this, the Nordic countries, it was very long. I made this distinction between the fast track and the incremental track. And we're just celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage. I don't know, when did women get the right to vote in Slovenia?
1946.
1946. So we all got it about the First World War, just like United States and UK. So we are celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage. And many, especially post-conflict countries are saying, okay, how long time did it take you to get to 40%, which we have on average? And we say, it took us 100 years. And they say, we're not going to wait that long. We're taking a fast track instead, which I think is reasonable. So that's what I'm saying, that the Scandinavian countries is not anymore the model, or not anymore the only model. I mean, the largest increase we ever had in one election in one country is 8 percentage points. And now we come back to that. We have countries who are doing like 10, 30 percentage points in one election.
Before going deeper into the project, Scandinavian countries are interesting and different from some others in doing this politics in two tracks, not only outside institutions, but also they as early as they did, enter into the politics. When and how did it happen in Sweden, for example, or in Denmark?
Well, because we're celebrating 100 years of women's suffrage, I just made some new research about what happened when women for the first time had the right to vote, and for the first time to stand for election. And in terms of voting, it was a success. But in terms of being elected, it was a disaster. And the women who have been fighting so hard for women's suffrage were so disappointed. Because in all the Nordic countries, women got about 2–3%, just around First World War, and no more during the whole interwar period. The whole interwar period, no more than 2 or 3%. And I'm trying to look into what really happens. And understand that I go into the protocols of the political parties. Because the political parties are the real gatekeepers. And they are the one who, that is also my theoretical point of view, they're the one who are really deciding who gets on the ballots and who stands in good constituencies, etc., etc. So I was going into the protocols to see what did they really think and why were there so few women elected. And it turns out that the result was, you can forget about percentages. Each party put one woman in a safe seat. So each party, and often the same women during this 20 years, were sitting, one social democrat, one liberal, etc., etc. And I'm doing this, I'm saying that to vote, okay, there was lots of resistance, but to stand as a candidate and be elected is much more controversial. And why is that? Well, it is because first there's a competition between those newcomers and then the men who are already sitting there, what we call the incumbents. And for instance, in Denmark, they enlarged the parliament from 114 to 140 seats because now all the new voters. But women only got 4 of those many new seats. And when I look what the party are doing, they say, okay, first all the men who were already members before the new constitution should be number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And then you can have one woman on a high position. And we even have an example from the Social Democratic Party where they decided in advance that women should have number 3 on the list to give women something, right? And there was a very popular woman who was very well known, and when the meeting in the party they had to have a vote on this, she got most votes. But now they had decided that she should have number 3, so of course she was put down on number 3, even if she won the election. And I want to quote Winston Churchill, if I may, because I've been thinking a lot about this, about women as intruders. But there is a room here in which women suddenly enter. And some of the men said, can we not smoke anymore? Because at that time, just before the World War I, women were not smoking, but men were smoking. And then Winston Churchill really talks about this, and I give you a small quote. And he's saying that to Lady Astor, who was the first woman in the House of Commons, United Kingdom. And she tells in a radio interview that when she was at the first period, the men didn't speak to her. They didn't say one word to her. And now she's asking Winston Churchill. And then he said once, "We hope to freeze you out." That's why they didn't talk to her. And then he said, "When you entered, Lady Astor, when you entered the House of Commons, I felt like a woman had entered my bathroom, and I had nothing to protect myself with except for a sponge." and this one was really kind of illustration that this was a male room, and that women were intruders. And I was really, I haven't found any Scandinavian quote for this, but this feeling, you simply don't believe it. So it's very interesting. You should try to do that and go into what the parties thought about when women come in. This is really a gender thing. And then they didn't talk to her for 4 years.
Okay, if we go back to this worldwide kvotah project, when it started, can you tell us some more about it? Because I'm not very sure that all of us are familiar with this project, which is huge, large, still ongoing. You're producing new facts and new reports.
We have a quota website, right, with all the quota systems in the world, all the countries, which is called quotaproject.org, which we're doing together with the International IDEA and the Interparliamentary Union, and then also Stockholm University. And if you don't find your country, you will find yours, of course, then you don't have a quota system, right? But I was feeling there in the start of the 19th that something was going on, and not just in the small few countries I knew, but something is going on in India, right? And something is going on in Argentina, and something goes on in South Africa. So I got a grant, I asked for a grant for the Swedish Research Council, and then I gathered researchers, including you, from all major regions in the world, at a lovely place in Stockholm. In the castle. And then every of these authors were going to write about their own region. And we, of course, found out there were so many similarities, but also differences. I would say, don't say I'm for or against quotas, because there are so many different kinds of quotas. And that's also my message when I go as an advisor, that, I mean, you have to say, many countries start from scratch, as if they're the first in the world, right? But there are so many experiences now, also bad experiences and good experiences. So, and then I thought, that was where I thought, okay, I'm going to work with this project on quotas for 3 years, but I have worked on that since the 90s. So, and now you have about 19 countries in the world, 90, who has made a quota law. And then you have about 30, 40 countries in which only parties have voluntary party quotas, like in the Nordic countries. And Denmark and Finland doesn't have any quotas, so you can get 40% if you take 100 years, right? That's possible. So it was an amazing development. And what was the resistance? There was very much resistance. And I was so amazed that the arguments used were enormously similar in various countries of the world. Enormously serious. Similar. And then you have the women's movement and women in political parties saying, why do we have so few women elected? We have to do something about it. But there's no doubt that gender quotas is an efficient way of changing rapidly and unwanted inequality. And that is what gender quota is about. To rapidly change an unwanted inequality. Right? It's just about that. And it's about the numerical representation. Right? Gender quotas is about the numbers or the shares. and we can return to the more substantial representation of the women. But it was amazing that there were so many countries in the world who were starting on this, at that point very much starting from scratch. Of course there were all kinds of quotas too. I talk about 3 waves of gender quotas. The first one, you come in also. The first one is Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, and it's very much about appointment, right? And then of course you have all the communist countries and their quota systems. And I don't know if, apart from some of you here who have been studying this, when I go to the post-communist countries, there's kind of myth about Susanna's knocking. Because so many places they say, oh, there was 30% quotas. I say, okay, there were no 30% quotas in the Politburo, were there? No. No. And there were only 1 woman in the ministry, usually a woman of Ministry of Culture. And I remember when I was giving a PhD course in Arkhangelsk, in southern, north, and it was just after the Wende, and here there was a woman professor saying we had 30% quotas. I said, show me. Show me the rules. And she sent the PhD student back to the library, working hard all night, and then she came next morning and saying, no, there was no general 30% quota. There was been some studies about the German Democratic Republic, the DDR. It was not about quotas in this sense. It was more that the farmers had their part of the parliament seats, and the trade union had their part, and the women's organizations had their part. But one of the interesting things is that, in fact, women's, and you can probably confirm this, that women's representation was increasing during the 70s and 80s on the trade union part and on the youth part. I forgot the youth. There was something going on in those societies too at that time. And of course I know that because of the change and all the bad things of thinking about that the quota is connected or connotation to the Soviet system. And I think that the post-Soviet countries probably also got this kind of shock that many post-countries go through today, that women's representation decreases, and now we all free. I was, as I said, advisor in Egypt, and when you had the first election in 2011, many of the young women's organizations, also the young women researchers, said we don't want quotas because now Mubarak is out and now is a free election. Whereas the old women's organizations say, no, we don't believe this. We think it's a dangerous route, right? So they took away the quota. Still had a quota, 50% for farmers and workers, but they didn't consider that a quota, right? The women's was very unpopular. And then they had the first election, and 2% women were elected. And many of those younger women's organizations, they changed. They say, okay. And of course, there were still patriarchal structures in society. They don't go away because you make a new electoral law. So it's a little bit, it's nice to be naive. That's the only way you can change the world, right? But it is naive to think that you make a new electoral law and then patriarchal structures are just disappear. It doesn't work like this. And I think that's what we all know now, isn't it?
We're talking about quotas, but there are different types of quotas. You already said something. Can you also explain a little bit about these different types of quotas? And what are the differences between them? And what is the difference between quotas and parity?
That's good. I like the last one because I made, together with a colleague, Milica Antić Gaber, we made a report, I think you quoted also, on quotas in Europe for the European Parliament. And the French chapter was written by Maria Chinot, and I translated her apology into quotas. And she was very angry, saying parity is not the same as quotas. I'm not really, I insist. Parity is a 50-50 quota, but there can be 30-70 quotas. There can be 40-60 quotas. So But the interesting thing about the parity discussion is, of course, that it rests on a very specific philosophical ground. Because what the French are saying is that only men and women together can define the common good. Which to me is not saying that we should have gender neutrality in politics, but we should have institutionalized gender parity. There's a discussion where you just touch essentialism a little bit when you use this kind of argument. So I don't think there's two different things, but I think it's very important to make this difference between voluntary party quotas, just some political parties for their own statutes make this thing, and then the law, which is binding for all political parties, and where you need sanction for non-compliance, and when you also need rank order rules if it is a PR system. But then you also have reserved seats. And reserved seats is known from minorities. As far as I know, you have reserved seats here for one Italian and one Hungarian. In the Polish parliament, you have 2 German reserved seats. But in many of those single-member districts systems, you know, the electoral system like we have in the UK and the United States and India, they have reserved seats, where you reserve certain seats to be elected for women only. And India is a fantastic example, because you have 1/3, you have a constitutional amendment for the local level only, 1/3 of all the seats at the local level is reserved for women. Well, how do you do that when you have a single-member district system? Like your political unit, the smaller voting unit, there's only one candidate for each party. Can you take 30% of one? No. So what they're doing is they have a rotation system in which each village is electing one to the local council. And it's on the rotation, basing of rotation, this village this time women can be candidates. Next time it's the next village which can only have women candidates. So only women can compete for this seat at this election. And then you also have reservation for scheduled caste, and they combine those two things. And we're talking about very patriarchal countryside here. And some of the women are saying, okay, I can go for this because I cannot compete with men. My husband will not allow me to do that. But I can go compete with only women when it's reserved for women. So you have about 1 million Indian women at the local level serving at the local council every period. This is an amazing. So you have the party quotas, you have the legislative quotas about the candidates, and then you have your reserved seats about those elected. But maybe we should also mention that, well, gender quotas is usually done because women are underrepresented, and so many people say it's unfair to men. Is that okay? We take that one? And my answer is that all depends on your diagnosis of the problem. Why are women underrepresented? You have to start from this very simple and very difficult question. You can also turn it around, saying, why are men overrepresented? That might even be a better question. Right? Why are men overrepresented? So everything depends on your. So my answer to this is that if everything was fair in society, there were no structural barriers, no discrimination, no sexual harassment, not necessary with any Me Too movement, right? Then of course quotas would be unfair. But if the diagnosis is that there are structural barriers and there are direct discrimination also going on, then quotas is a compensation for those structural barriers. Quotas is not discrimination of men, but a compensation for the discrimination and the structural barriers that come with it. And if we agree on that diagnosis, we can begin to talk about strategies. We can begin to talk about gender quotas as one strategy. Financial problems is also something you have to work on. Men in general have much more money to use for their campaigns. There are sexual harassment, as we know, on the internet, hate speech against the women. So there are many things, and quota is not a miracle cure serving or helping all these problems. It's about the numbers. And I think it's very popular now among women's organizations because it works. Constructed in the right way, I can make you a gender quota system which works. And maybe it's also so unpopular exactly because it works. You can make historical jumps which we have never seen before, like that. Like we did in Bolivia, in Rwanda, in Senegal. 10, 20, 30% increase in one election. I mean, we have never tried this. They call it a gender shock. Yeah.
But there are also many oppositions
Yeah.
to gender quotas. There were and there are still
Yeah.
in some countries. What were the strongest opposition and what were the strongest arguments that you were faced and difficult to solve?
I'm not sure that any of them I find difficult, but let me give you some of them. One is, of course, that gender quotas or quotas for any group is a violation of the free will of the voters. Right? That you are making a restriction on what the voters can do. And my answer to this is that the parties already control what the voters can do. Because when you enter a polling station, the names are already there. And most voters have no idea where their name comes from. Right? You have to go into what we call the secret garden of politics, is where the nomination takes place. And in many places it's not transparent, it's even not formalized, it's an old boys network. Right? And so you have to go into and see how are the candidates doing. So the voters are not very free because the political parties had already, even in an open list system, they had already placed some candidates in the strongholds of the party. And usually there are much more of the male candidates who have positions who nominate in the stronghold of the party, where women are in the party knows where they're strong, usually. Let's go back to the Slovenian system where you change the majority all the time, right? But usually parties know where they're strong, and they put their own men there. Right? But the voters have no idea how this plays through. So that's one. The free will of the voters. I mean, the voters are already restricted. And we just give the voters a possibility to vote for women. And here's an example for one of my consultancy. Bhutan. I was in there twice as a consultant. It's a beautiful country, the hill of the Himalaya, and they just introduced democracy. The king decided that it should be a democracy now. And they had this first election. I'm always very interested in this first election. And they had this hope that now everything was free, and women only got 8%, and they say, why? And even when I came there, even the women's movement, but many people also, high up in the administration said that's because women don't vote for women. That's the argument. And when I hear this argument, you blame women here for their underrepresentation, saying that women are underrepresented because women don't vote for women, right? I heard that in Morocco also. I heard the same argument in Egypt. And every time I hear it, I ask, how do you know? Don't you have secret voting? How do you know to what extent voters vote for men or women candidates? You need survey data for that, right? And in most cases you don't. This was another one, that was in Morocco, yeah. They say to me, we know that women don't vote for women. I say, okay, can you show me the figures? Yeah, I will show you tomorrow. And they came next day, I say no. So it is wrong, isn't it? So in Bhutan, we said, can we see the electoral statistics? Is this true that women don't vote for women? Well, we don't have survey data. Okay, can we see the electoral statistics about the candidates then? And then it turned out that in 3/4 of all the constituencies over this hilly country, there were no women candidates to vote for. So how can you blame the women for not voting for women candidates when there are no women candidates? So you have to go one step back and say, who controls the nominations? Who nominated all these people? And then I made some calculations for those 25% of the constituencies which had both men and women candidates. And the success rate of the men and the women candidates were almost identical. So there was nothing about the voters were against the women candidates. The big problem was that the political parties didn't want to.
Let me explain what was the quite strong argument against quotas here in Slovenia in the 90s, before we succeeded to introduce quotas into the law. It was the opposite, because the party politicians in the parliament quite often said that the free will of the parties is violated because they cannot put the list of the candidates on their free will, they have to put some limit. So it was not on the side of voters, but on the side of the parties. And of course they were strong because there were those who accept or not the new rules. So it was quite difficult in the 90s, and some of you here remember it quite well, that we proposed several times in the parliament different variations of the change of the law on the parties first and then on the electoral laws. But it did not succeed. So.
But I would say they are right.
They are right.
This is, of course, restricting the free will of the political parties. And why are we doing that? Because we are starting from the point of view of human rights, of UN declarations, for instance, the Binding Platform for Action, saying that the elected assemblies should mirror the population. And there is a new discourse that you cannot talk about a full democracy when women are de facto excluded, or there are very few women. So we are saying, yes, dear political parties, if you don't accept this human rights argument, which is very much, all the governments have signed it today, or almost all of them, then there is some restriction on you. Of course, in the Nordic countries we don't have a law. The political parties are running to do that, and many countries, South Africa doesn't have a law, right? Of course, if you comply with the ideal of the mirror argument, that the elected assembly should mirror the population, also in terms of immigrants and minorities, etc. Then of course the quota is a strategy to achieve this. But they are absolutely right. It is a restriction on the old boys network.
Yeah.
It is a restriction on the old boys network. And asking the question, why are men overrepresented? There was a very promising young scholar from Uppsala, Ljubljana, who made analysis of the parliament in Thailand. Thailand have so many good women in business and so many well-educated women, and they have a parliamentary representation about 3 or 4%. And she was making this, starting from why are men overrepresented. So she made interviews with the men sitting in parliament and said, how were you recruited? Individual. Who recruited you? Who came in and did like this, right? And she could draw a whole old boys network. And the clans and the families, of course. And this is, I see this as a democratic strategy to trash the clan recruitment, the family recruitment, the upper class elite recruitment, to make this more important. There was one argument I hear everywhere. I should say that also. This is about if you ask voters for women, what about when the next group will come? The homosexuals will come, and the red hairs will come, and those who live in villas will come. So what do I say about that? Well, I say there are some, forget about those with the red hair, right? I think it's fine that also the minorities they already have long traditions for the national minorities, but also new minorities and immigrants follow. And we can see that where you have had, we have made a survey in political parties in Europe showing that we ask the political parties, are you discussing quotas for women, are you discussing quotas for immigrants and minorities? And it always starts with women. They start with discussing gender quotas for women, and then comes a discussion about gender quotas for those minorities. It's never the other way around. And I think that's fine. Of course, you cannot, if you have a minority which only is about 0.5%, I mean, you rather would have that they have a council which has influence on the legislation that they approve, rather than they would have 1.5% in parliament if you can have that. But now you have quoted for so many years, it doesn't seem to be a problem, but I like that it opens up for a more intersectional perspective on. I do believe that the elected parliaments, elected local councils should reflect the population as far as possible. I think that is a very, very good intention. And you know, in Denmark, my country of origin, 25% of the members of parliament in the last elected parliament are political scientists, like me. I mean, political scientists are fine. I have one of them myself, but that is not representative. And therefore politics get more and more bureaucratic because this kind of thinking. So we're not on a route to a more and more diverse parliament. We are on a route to a more and more elitist parliament. And I think this is part of it.
You already started before and now as well with the question what quotas can and cannot do. So what we can expect from quotas and what we cannot, and what else we can do to make the parliament more representative.
As I said, quotas is not a miracle cure. It doesn't cure all the problems. It doesn't remove all the barriers. But sometimes I do think it's a good idea to work on this separately. There are also many feminists who say, why should we have more women in politics? I mean, they are just, loyal women, or they don't. Some of them are not feminists, of course not. It's also interesting to look at the feminist opposition, because there is some feminist opposition here. We have to be very clear about the gender quota is about increasing the number, to take away an unwanted inequality and underrepresentation. It is about what we call descriptive representation. And sometimes I think it's fine. Just now I'm a consultant on that. I know that the women's movement would love to have more feminist women elected, right? But at this point I want to increase the number of women, right? And hopefully the more diverse the sample of women also. But and why is that important? But I feel that when you work against the exclusion of women, previously formally, now structural, you can make alliances across all women's groups, because we all agree that elected assemblies should reflect the population. Where you begin to talk about policies, substantial representation, there's a lot of split between women's movement. There are some issues you can make broad coalitions on, as you do here, and there are others you cannot. But the exclusion of women, just like in the old days on the suffrage, can make broad coalitions of women's organizations, and supported by supportive men on this also. So in some way I think it's fine to make this concentration in some of it. But then you have the paradox of quotas. Because as I said, quotas is about the numbers only. Women's movement want quotas to change policy. And here's my last question, which I discussed in this new book, Has Democracy Failed Women? Just came out. I'm asking, why is it that all those male-dominated parliaments have passed quota laws? I said you have about 90 parliaments in the world who have passed quota laws. And of course none of them had a female majority. Today we only have a couple of countries with female majority, but that was because of the quota. Bolivia and Rwanda. Why is it that all those male-dominated parliaments passed quota laws? That is really a puzzle. And we also, I worked together with Pippa Norris, and this also made all kind of structural analysis, and we cannot even see that. I mean, you have quotas in democracies, in semi-democracies, and authoritarian regimes. You have quotas in rich countries and in not rich countries. So we have to go for something else. We're going into the difficult question of motives, and that is very difficult. What are the motives here? And I can list you a couple of motives, but the point of the departure is that politics is a game of bargaining. It's a game of compromises. I mean, even when you pass environmental laws, some of those who vote for are not really convinced that it's a good idea. But if you vote for my budget, I will vote for your quota law, right? Or your environmental law. And there's lots of this in it. It's a kind of, and of course, all those parliaments are not feminists. Of course they're not. We have to start, but there are some men who are pushing this, and there are lots of women who are pushing this. So we're going into different kind of motives, and one is there's a competition between countries now, especially the neighboring countries. And here, for instance, you have the Balkan countries, you have Slovenia being the first and in the forefront, and now the rest will try to come after. In Latin America, it's Argentina, who's the first one. And in North Africa, it was Tunisia, and here came Algeria, suddenly made a quota law and said, now we are number one. Now Tunis have had a new election, and they are number one again. But there is some kind of competition. And why is that? Because we didn't have that competition 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It is because there is a new discourse in the world that having more women or coming close to parity is a sign of being democratic and a sign of being modern. And I welcome this kind of arguments. Because I mean, I'm old enough to live in the periods where nobody thought it was undemocratic that men had all the seats. But today there is this pressure in the global discourse that to have very few women is not a sign that something is wrong here, that you're not sufficiently inclusive, you're not sufficiently modern, etc., etc. So even if sometimes we laugh at this argument and say, it's just because they want to be modern. Yes, but if I don't expect all of them to be feminists, I would rather have them like to be modern and recruit more women in that kind of realistic point of view. So now the big question is here then, of course, when you then reach about parity, what will happen then? Because there is something about, and I feel that when I go around the world, there's something about that those male-dominated assemblies give it to women as a present, right? Which is not, it's a little bit complicated here, because when women are beginning to close 40–50%, it's not a present anymore. That's just back to the power game, and who has the seats, etc. So therefore, of course, I fear the backlash when there's something about this, now we do something and we show that we're model and we're getting into number one, right? But at the same time, then you have the quota law. So quota law, for me, is not just to get more women into politics, it's also to prevent a backlash. Because it's much more complicated to make this backlash if you have this quota law. Because then you have to change the law and say, we don't want so many women. Right? Or we think it's not necessary anymore. Unfortunately, I think there's a backlash going on in the world. So I think that quota laws are important now, not just to increase the number of women, but also to prevent a backlash when it's not a present level.
You know a lot about Slovenia, and you know a lot about let's say, our region, Southeast Europe. How would you comment the situation in Slovenia, and the effects of it in comparison with others?
Right. Milica and I edited a special issue of this Teorija and Praxis. I don't know if I pronounce it right. Which is in English, and here we have very good chapters on the quota laws in, we call it Central East Asia, right? Europe. Sorry. sorry. No, I think, I mean, Slovenia is of course very important here because you were the first and you were showing the way. And therefore, of course, it's very, very important. Was Slovenia not the first?
No.
Oh, you mean that you take the communist time also?
No. In communist times, Slovenia has the best gender
Right.
equality policy in Yugoslavia.
Right.
But after the wars, the first countries to start with the quota
Bosnia.
were
Bosnia,
Bosnia, Kosovo,
and Kosovo. Yes. Kosovo made a system which is complicated. I've been there as a consultant and I supported it, but it's not the best system in the world. But I think that the Slovenia is very interesting. I'm a little bit amazed about the electoral system for the National Assembly. This strange combination of proportional representation and single member district system combined doesn't make it easier for women, I would say. The most important thing about a quota system is that it has rank order rules, which yours have, right?
Not for the national election, but for the
No, you can't have it for a national election because you have this single member district, you only have one. I say, how can you take 30% of one, right? But you have it for the European Parliament and for the local election. And rank order rules are so important. You can have 50% women demand, and if all the women are in the bottom of the list, you can just forget it, right? It's very important to have rules sanctioned for non-compliance. And also for that it's not being treated, cheated with. As I hear this question of that you can have some women who stand in different constituencies and when they count, the same woman can count two, even if she's just one. That is cheating, I would say. That is cheating.
They tried, yeah.
So it's very important that you have two systems of sanctions. You can have the financial penalty, which they have in France at the national level, but unfortunately the rich party, they don't care. At the local level they have rejection by the electoral commission, and that is efficient, and that's what you have here.
Yes.
So I hope that the electoral commission will reject this kind of counting.
They already did it, yeah.
They already did? Very good. Because it's very important that you say that we reject the list that doesn't comply. And I say that, I mean, it's just like the traffic law. You have a traffic law that you're not allowed to go over the street for red. So you wouldn't say, okay, it doesn't count today or tomorrow. It's the same with all those laws about gender equality. They should be laws taken very seriously. So a sanction for non-compliance means that the party cannot stand for election if you don't comply with the law. And that is, many places have financial incentives or they have financial penalties. What is effective is rejection of the list that doesn't comply with the law. And I was trying to find out if I could see how many lists have been rejected around the world. It seemed to be very few. And why is that? Well, that's of course because the political parties, they are there because they want to stand for election, right? And if you don't comply with the law, they cannot, I mean, the whole list can go home and not stand for election. And the raison d'etre of political parties is to stand for election. And that's why it works, because then they really run and try to find those women. And that goes against the argument you forgot. They say there are not enough women.
Yep.
Right. And you can see now that it works, that you can find those women. Of course, I don't want them to find the woman in the last week before the election. That's a very bad way of doing it. You have to have a long-time strategy for being more inclusive. And there are enough qualified women around the world to fit all the parliaments and all the local councils in the world. Right? And women only demand 50%.
Great. So I will now open discussion for public, for you, for being listening almost 1 hour, and then we have a chance to ask our guests or to comment what we've already said. So please. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Dr. Milica Antić Gaber and I'm great fan of yours, and I'm so happy to have this opportunity to meet you in person. I have enjoyed your presentation or introduction very much. I have several questions and some comments. First, also, our experience in Albania, Sonia and myself, we have worked a lot in Albania on revision of gender quota. And in Albanian case, it was very important to ensure in the code that the woman is replaced by a woman, because we have seen situations where women actually got position in the parliament, and they were asked to step down through informal channels within their parties. So that was, I mean, we have seen that was a lot of pressure. So so Albania is one of the few countries in Europe that has parity non-compliance, rejections for non-compliance, and also this line where women should be replaced by a woman. You have mentioned, I would like your opinion, because there are lots of discussions in Slovenia that the electoral system should change. So we can for sure foresee situations where there will be attacks on gender quota. And I think very important in your speech is that also the examples you gave us, that women, we should fight not to give up our hard-won rights. So if there is a gender quota that actually shows that it functions, then why to give it up? Because we believe that under the new system or regime or whatever, things will work better. I think also your thinking about backlash is very important. And I have one more point. Yes. We have seen that, for example, Albania, Tunisia are two countries where we have gender quotas for the local elections. And in both countries there has been lots of resistance to apply the same formula at the national level. And in some other countries we see the opposite trend, where we have quotas for the national parliaments but not for the local elections. And I would like to hear your opinion about that. Or also how...
Which country did you mention apart from...
Albania and Tunisia, they have the local level. And then for the national level, we have in some countries, I cannot remember now, but anyway, there are countries that have only quota for the parliament. So in your experience, how we could approach this, because we believe of course that it's very important to be able also to balance the women's participation at all levels of governance.
Well, I think there must be some hand here in the Balkans, because most features of the quota systems are similar, right? And we talk also about 1/3, and most systems are PR. Slovenia is a little bit special here. I have Montenegro also this about if somebody dies, just like Albania. I think that's a very good one to have in Belgium too. I think it's a good one to do that. I think you should change your election system. I say that to when people in the United States or say what should we do to get this joint barrier, and the United States have such a low women's representation. I say change your electoral system, and I know they will never do that. The same about Great Britain, right? But now Great Britain for the first time have 32% women in parliament, and it's been very, 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 very slow. So it is among that from the Labour Party's already shortlist, but. Yes, you should change this, because it's so, I mean, to make a quota system when each party only have one candidate, right? So then you have to have horizontal quotas, and that is what they are working on in Tunisia now. By the way, they have national quotas. You said they only have local.
They do?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, then that's mistake.
I was a consultant on that, so I can swear to you.
Yeah.
They have a and they have a civil system, a PR system, and a civil system, and this is a very good example of this about who's number one when you have men, women, or women, men, because after Ben Ali was ousted, there was almost 100 new parties, and most of them only got one elected, right? And only 7% of number ones were women. Except for the Ennahda, the Islamist party or Islamist Democratic Party, they had more women elected because they got 2 or 3 in each constituency. So it's very, very important. So now they're beginning to talk about having what we call a horizontal quota, but that the party should have, for instance, 30% of each gender as the top candidate. So we're beginning to count top candidates, and I think that's important to do also in Slovenia, to count. But of course, you know, this electoral system is awful. But, sorry, no, but it is very important. So the local and the national, yes. I can see that most countries in the Balkan has on the local level too, right? The same system. Yes. In fact, I was discussing with people in UN Women. They wanted to make a photo website. The one we have made is on the national parliament. Wanted to make one on the local. And I said at that time, it's impossible because local councils are so different. But now I regret that we should do that because no matter that the local councils are so different, there are certain mechanisms you can use. So for instance, in India, why do they have this very famous reserve seat system at the local level? And they have had proposals for quotas at a national level for so many years.
Yeah.
And my Indian colleague says it's very simple, because those who are going to vote this are members of parliament, and they don't want to lose their seat. But it's much more easy for parliament to make a law for the local, because it's not their seats who's at stake. So that might be one of the reasons. And then those who have a national and not a local, not in the Balkans. I think most have a local one. Sometimes they start with the national, I agree with that, and then comes the local. I have all the countries in my head, but I can't find one.
I also cannot recall, but I know I was amazed that they actually had it on the national level. But if you kid me now, I cannot.
Yeah, that probably
Yeah.
Go on,
But if I find out, send you.
yeah, sure, there are some. You know something?
Yeah. I would like to comment on this one. Why on the national level and not on the local? Because all the movements for gender equality in the parliament started top down. In the sense that women from the parliament, very few who were there, started the process. And sometimes they started it just for one level, and then later on it became normal for all levels of elections. And in other countries it started like in India, where the concession was given to the women on the local level, but it was impossible to take it on the national level. My comment is a little bit humorous, and it goes about Slovenia. In Slovenia, women tried very many times to change the electoral system with very simple things. For example, for the national parliament, just to get rid of the small units and to have a list on the 8 big districts. And then we would have a normal list, a proportional system, a zipper. Every second unit should be headed by a woman. And then we could even have 2 proportional obligatory votes, one for a woman candidate, one for a male candidate. And here we go. We could have it simply solved. But those who should vote for this sit in the parliament and they would never vote for it. But this never is running out. Why? Because the political landscape in Slovenia changed in the last year so much that practically not one political party can predict which district, local small district, is the best for the men who want to have it. So they cannot anymore really decide who will win elections, because it is a tombola. It can happen absolutely differently than the parties think. And this is the moment when we might have the chance to change them. Just to have, again, the parties in command who will be elected. And in this case, we can probably fight for the solutions we propose.
The problem is, of course, also with this single-member district that there is a lack of very low representativeness. Of course, you have local direct contact with your candidates, but you can have large minorities who don't get any seats at all. For instance, in the United Kingdom, the Green Party has about 1 million votes, and they only get 1 seat because you have to be very strong in one constituency. And usually, if you are 10% in all constituency, you don't get anything because there's only one. The winner takes it all. So it's not very representative system.
Now, in our case, it's different. It can happen that a small district will have 3 persons in the parliament, and then a really big district will have none. It's also, not one political party would be really strong in this district. And in another, you will have 3 from different parties. And this is really crazy. It means that we do not have a representative parliament. And we need to change the system.
So, I mean, of course, single-member districts make a special relation between the representative and the district, but it's very unrepresentative, and many people feel that they don't have a representative who's covering their point of view. One thing is to be local, but we also ideological different, not just local.
I think the discussion about the electoral system is quite heavy.
It's very
issue for the discussion for the larger public, because you really have to be
very
well informed.
I do agree. I think the devil is in the detail here.
Yeah.
And when my experience is that every country thinks that they have,
The most complicated.
no, they think they have the only right one. And do they have other systems in other kinds of the world? I mean, people are really homegrown when it goes to, and also many people do not understand the electoral system. This is also very undemocratic. Right? There's a small elite who knows how this really goes and can play the system.
But not only ordinary people, even the candidates. I remember when we did the training for the women who wanted to run, they didn't have the slightest clue about how the system works. So when we did in the women's lobby research and discovered that this is not a person who is electable, but a district which is electable. And it is important to get the district which is electable. And when we explained this to the women candidates, the parties could not anymore pull them for the left and give them the chance to the district where they didn't have any chances. So it's a big effort needed to explain to even to those who want to run how the system works.
I agree. And then they make a system which is understandable. Yeah. No, I think the devil is really in the details. You can make so many mistakes, also about quota systems. You can make, I think it's Milica who calls it pragmatic when a quota system is made which is in fact constructed in a way to give no result. But I also feel, like you say, that there are many lawmakers around the world who don't know. Don't know how it works. Absolutely. There are many people who don't know how it works.
What we do know here is that we don't want to change from the proportional to the majority. That's for sure.
That's for sure.
From the perspective of women's electability, not from the perspective of some of the countries they want to rule on their own. That's a different question.
Yeah.
But from this point of view, we definitely don't want to change the electoral system. What was agreed very largely among the political parties in, I think, 2011, when the proposals were put down for the change of the law, was that we can expel these small units, call it like that, inside the electoral district. But it was agreed quite largely, but then it didn't go to the process.
Yeah.
Into the parliament.
But even if you want to change the system, don't go like in the United Kingdom or United States.
Yeah.
No.
We don't want
That would be a bad solution, and it's a bad. You know, if we take all the countries in the world which have a PR system and all the countries which have a single-member district seats, the average number of women, the percentage of women is higher in proportional representation electoral systems than in the other, and the mixed ones is in between. And Germany is a very good example of the independent effect of electoral systems, because they have half the seats in the Bundestag are elected by PR and half are elected by single member districts. And women's representation is always higher in the PR part than in the single member districts. And everything, most other things are being equal. So it's for a researcher, this is gefundenes Fressen to look at this system. The electoral system has an independent effect. No doubt about that.
Any more questions or comments? If not, I will come back to the discussion we had during the lunch.
Okay.
We discussed the situation which happened in the last days here in Slovenia. And I just wanted to ask you if you can comment about the way in which we put the quotas into the law in Slovenia, because we defined the quotas here as no gender can be underrepresented on the candidates with less than, let's say, 35% in the national parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a gender-neutral way, which now makes some difficulties to some of the parties. What you would say, would you support a gender-neutral way of defining quotas, or would you propose the more precise, because women are underrepresented, we need women's quotas?
Right. When I go around the world, I ask people, what kind of quotas do you have? Do you have a gender-neutral one or one for women? And most of them have been fighting for it. Say, we have one for women. And I say, can you show me the law? And the law is gender-neutral and not for women. And I think that's a good idea. Gender-neutral means that we say, like you say, for instance, at least 35% of each gender, or that among the first on the list in the PR system, 1 out of 3 should be of the other gender, right? Or in Belgium, it said the 2 first candidates cannot be of the same sex. It's a very good one. This is a very good argument to be used when you get those new people who are saying that, oh, women are taking over now, are they? Or that 30% women is women dominance, almost, right? You say, okay, this is a quota, it might be temporary even, but it's a gender-neutral quota. So it will absolutely prevent any gender from dominating the other one. And we want to get away from this one gender dominating the other one. So, for instance, in the Scandinavian countries where we have many, on the left, many active women, we have one man, in fact, who was elected to the European Parliament because of the quota. Yeah, the quota doesn't exist anymore, but at that time in 84 or 83 it was, 84 maybe, he was elected because in his party they have made the country's a national district, and the party made a referendum within, among the members who should be number 1, number 2, number 3, and 4. And the 4 who got most were women. So this man, whom I know very well, was moved up as number 2. And the party only got 2 in the European Parliament. So 1 man and 1 woman was elected. But you know, the curious thing was that no journalist came up to him and said, how was it to be elected because of quota? Quota man. Nobody asked him this question, right? But I think that was fair enough. So I think I absolutely thought gender-neutral quota rules. And I would also say that this about the gradual increase which you have in Slovenia is very unusual. There are very few countries in the world who has this. And you had this about 25% and 30% and then 35%. And the party even went over that. But that is not a bad idea. If you have made a compromise here. And I'm sure that nobody would make it reverse it and say we should go back from 35 to 30 to 25. So I think there are many good things about the Slovenian quota system. Absolutely good thing. And I mean, it has results, right? I think that you would not have reached this high proportion of women without a quota system in Sweden.
I think we can stop here because these were the right words at the end. And I hope that some journalists who are here will send the message to the wider public. And I would really like to thank you to talk today to us about this very hot topic today in Slovenia. And I hope you will soon come back.
Thank you very much. Thank you.